For Section 23 Misuse of Drugs Act search, you don't have to say anything.
I've got a bit of cannabis on me.
Have you?
Yeah.
Come in. Right, Billy, I mean it. Stay there, okay?
Yeah.
You got him, Josh?
I'm not trying to restrain you, sir.
You ain't got nothing on you?
No. So I'm not trying to fight back with you or nothing.
Yeah, I know.
When detectives raided a modest home in Wisbech, they didn't just find cash and cocaine. They uncovered a system, a street empire built by Fred Cook and Billy Venmore, two men barely out of their teens who thought they could outsmart the law. At just 22 and 20 years old, they ruled the streets like self-made kings, moving Class A drugs across Norfolk and beyond with ruthless efficiency. But their empire didn't fall to violence or betrayal. It crumbled because of a single mistake, a phone, left in a pocket, filled with every secret they thought was safe. Fred Cook grew up in Wisbech, a quiet Cambridgeshire town that rarely made national news, until his name appeared in police press releases years later. Court documents and local authority reports describe the area as one struggling with pockets of deprivation, unemployment, and a growing drug problem among young people. It was an environment that quietly shaped him. Fred wasn't loud or reckless. Those who knew him described him as clever, quiet, and always observant, the kind of person who noticed small details others missed. Even as a teenager, he had a sharp understanding of people, how to win their trust, how to test their limits, and how to make them follow his lead without ever raising his voice. He didn't come from organized crime, he built himself into it. Police summaries from the Eastern Region Special Operations Unit later revealed how individuals like Cook began with small steps, petty theft, minor drug exchanges, and street-level networking that went unnoticed for years. Fred used those years to study the trade like a system. He wasn't chasing chaos. He was building a structure. Then came Billy Venmore, younger, eager, and searching for direction. Billy admired Fred. To him, Fred represented control, respect, and easy money. The designer trainers, the confidence, the quiet authority, it all drew him in. The pair found themselves surrounded by what local reports called open street dealing. In areas of Wisbech, small-time drug trades were as common as takeaway runs, everyone knew someone involved. That culture made entry easy. Fred took advantage of it, setting up small deals and testing loyalty one person at a time. He learned early that fear was a tool, but secrecy was a weapon. Every move, every exchange, was deliberate. He didn't post online, didn't brag, and didn't trust easily. Fred Cook wasn't trying to be seen. He was trying to be obeyed. And in time, he would be. If you think stories like this only happen in other towns, you're mistaken. Every place has a Fred Cook, quiet, unnoticed, waiting for a chance. Subscribe now, because the next empire like his might already be forming right where you live. By 2020, Fred Cook had evolved from a quiet observer into a calculated organizer. Police case summaries from the Eastern Region Special Operations Unit later revealed how his operation, known locally as the Wisbech Drugs Line, was built during the height of the COVID-19 lockdown. While the country stood still, Fred saw opportunity. His model was simple, efficient, and ruthless in its precision. Instead of standing on street corners, Cook relied on mobile phones and discreet deliveries. Customers placed orders through coded messages. Runners, usually addicts or vulnerable locals, dropped packages across Wisbech, Kings Lynn, and surrounding areas. During lockdown, when most social contact was restricted, drug lines like Cook's thrived. Government data from the Home Office later confirmed that Class A drug markets did not slow down during the pandemic, they adapted. Cook's business became a model of that adaptation. Billy Venmore, now his trusted protege, learned quickly. He handled coordination, answering calls, managing runners, and keeping the system smooth. Under Fred's guidance, Billy began to understand the real power of logistics, timing, control, and secrecy. Demand rose as isolation deepened. Addicts who could no longer travel turned to delivery-based supply. Younger users, curious and restless, became new customers. What started as a few small exchanges became a full-scale business hidden in plain sight. Police intelligence officers began to notice patterns, the same mobile number appearing across multiple investigations and familiar faces caught on CCTV in the same streets. Local reports described it as a network that operated like a company, disciplined, silent, and invisible. But even the most careful systems leave traces. And Fred Cook's network was starting to leave plenty. As months passed, the Whizbit drugs line evolved from a small-town operation into a network stretching across Norfolk and nearby towns. Fred Cook was no longer just a dealer, he was a strategist. Every move was deliberate, every order coded. By 2022, Cook's operation had become disturbingly efficient. He never stood on corners or made hand-to-hand exchanges. His empire ran through encrypted phones and late-night messages, every word coded. Tickets meant deals, balloons meant stop, and routes changed daily to keep police guessing. But Cook's power didn't just come from drugs, it came from image. He dressed like success. Stone Island jackets, Moncler puffers, and luxury watches that cost more than a local's monthly wage. He wasn't hiding wealth, he flaunted it. The designer brands, the flash cars, the social media posts, they weren't just indulgence. They were intimidating. A message to rivals and customers alike, we're in control. Venmore followed closely behind. He mirrored Cook's style, sharp, confident, and fearless. Together, they crafted a public image that blurred the line between gangster and influencer. Locals started calling them the kings of Whizbit. Behind the scenes, Cook had already begun expanding his reach through fraud. Using stolen identities, he created fake insurance policies and altered car registrations. All to hide his movements and obscure his cash flow. It wasn't just street crime anymore. It was a business, a dual-income empire powered by Class A drugs and digital deception. The combination made them rich and overconfident. The more careful they became, the more predictable their patterns looked to police intelligence teams quietly watching from afar. But Cook couldn't see it. From his perspective, the system was flawless, coded, encrypted, and loyal. He believed his structure made him untouchable. By the time the Whizbit drugs line reached its peak, it was running with the precision of a small corporation. Every message, every drop, every deal, controlled through a maze of codes and timing. Customers didn't ask for drugs directly. Instead, they used phrases like 2 tickets, balloon, or flake. Each word was a signal, each text a transaction disguised as casual chatter. Drop-offs were timed down to the minute. Locations changed constantly. No corners, no visible exchanges, just quiet handovers in car parks, alleyways, or side streets. The cars were always clean, often freshly purchased or insured under fake names. Phones were swapped weekly, sometimes daily, to avoid tracing. Cook's paranoia disguised itself as professionalism, and to outsiders, it looked like genius. Inside his home, police surveillance would later find the true scale of his ambition. Designer boxes stacked along the walls, rows of unworn trainers, a cash-counting machine sitting brazenly on the table, not hidden, but displayed. To Cook, this wasn't a crime. It was an achievement. Each receipt, each label, each watch, proof of control, power, and precision. Around Whizbit, his reputation spread quickly. Locals whispered about the kings of Whizbit. Fred Cook, the unseen boss. Billy Venmore, the face on the streets. One controlled the network, the other maintained discipline. Venmore made sure the rules were followed, debts were paid, and problems stayed quiet. But success breeds blindness. The cleaner their system became, the more predictable it looked to the quiet eyes watching from the outside. Police analysts had already begun mapping patterns, the same timings, the same vehicles, the same routes. Every encrypted message, every burner phone, and every repeat delivery was building a digital trail Cook couldn't erase. From the outside, their empire looked untouchable. But in the background, investigators were quietly recording, building a case one text, one trip, and one transaction at a time. The illusion of control was starting to crack. And the fall, though still unseen, was already in motion. By spring 2024, the empire Fred Cook built was running smoother than ever. Orders came in, cash flowed out, and every corner of Whizbit seemed to echo his quiet authority. But the same discipline that made his network thrive was the very thing that would bring it down. It began, as it often does, with something routine. May 25, 2024. A warm Thursday afternoon in Kings Lynn. Police officers on a standard patrol stopped a grey Vauxhall Astra for a minor traffic infraction. Behind the wheel, Billy Venmore. He was calm, polite, and practiced. But the officers noticed the nervous tapping of his thumb against the gear stick. It was enough to justify a search. Inside his jacket, small wraps of cocaine, neatly bagged for street sale. Inside the glove compartment, a mobile phone, cheap, disposable, and switched off. To most officers, that would have been just another arrest. But this time, the phone was different. When digital forensics examined it, they found hundreds of encrypted messages, codes, drop locations, customer lists, and times. Each message is linked to a wider structure. Venmore hadn't just been caught with drugs, he'd been caught with the blueprint of an empire. The discovery sent quiet ripples through the Norfolk Police Organized Crime Unit. They had names, phone numbers, times, routes, and something even more valuable, pattern consistency. Venmore was released on bail. Outwardly, he carried on as normal, still answering calls, still seen in Wisbit. But behind him, every movement, every delivery, was now being tracked. Police were patient. They didn't rush the case. They wanted the top, not the runner, not the courier, but the strategist. And they knew exactly who that was. Fred Cook. For weeks, Cook carried on, unaware that his protégé had become an unintentional informant. What made it worse, the messages from Venmore's phone were still syncing with Cook's active devices. Every new message sent, every coded phrase used, added another layer to the prosecution's map. Cook believed his system was impenetrable. In reality, it had become a live feed into his own downfall. Then came August 28, 2022. A small town, Downham Market. Cook was stopped by officers under suspicion of driving without insurance, again, routine. But the search revealed bundles of cash, fraudulent bank cards, and documentation linking him to multiple accounts under false names. When his phone was examined, investigators found the same code words, the same message templates, and identical delivery times as those from Venmore's seized device. It was the missing link, the final piece of the puzzle. 2 phones, 2 men, 1 identical system. Still, the police didn't move in right away. They wanted the full picture, every accomplice, every address, every trace of cash. Unbeknownst to Cook, plainclothes officers were already mapping his contacts, following his couriers, and tracing his suppliers across Norfolk and Cambridgeshire. In whispers, word began spreading that someone had slipped, a phone found, a leak somewhere inside. Cook grew suspicious. He started changing numbers more frequently, rotating cars, and keeping his circle small. But the paranoia that once protected him now began tearing him apart. Every message felt risky. Every meeting felt watched. And he was right. Because behind every silent drive, every cautious glance over his shoulder, the investigation was tightening, day by day. Fred Cook thought secrecy was his shield. But by then, secrecy had already turned into isolation. And isolation was exactly where the police wanted him. The betrayal wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was digital, silent, invisible, and irreversible. Cook didn't know it yet. But the empire he built on control and caution was already collapsing, one message at a time. June 19, 2024, dawn broke quietly over Wisbit. But for Fred Cook and Billy Venmore, it was already over. At exactly 6 a.m., coordinated raids struck multiple addresses across Norfolk and Cambridgeshire. Dozens of officers moved in, doors smashed, flashlights slicing through the dark, and shouts echoing through the narrow streets. For months, police had been watching, listening, and waiting. Now, they were executing Operation Orcas, a full-scale takedown of the network that had quietly flooded Wisbit's streets. At Cook's address, officers forced entry. Inside, it looked more like the home of a celebrity than a 22-year-old. Designer trainers still in boxes. Luxury watches displayed on the dresser. Bundles of cash stacked in a drawer. But the real prize wasn't the money, it was the phones. Several devices, all encrypted and all linked back to the same message chains uncovered from Venmore's earlier arrest. Each phone told a story, every order, every drop, every deal. In a second raid across town, Billy Venmore barely reacted. When officers came through the door, he simply raised his hands and nodded, almost relieved. Inside his property, police found smaller quantities of cocaine and evidence of fraudulent transactions connected to Cook's accounts. By the time the sun fully rose, both men were in custody, silent, expressionless, and surrounded by the empire they'd built and destroyed. Investigators later described the structure as shockingly mature for their age. Two men in their early 20s had orchestrated a distribution system covering multiple towns, efficient, disciplined, and almost corporate in its precision. But no encryption, no system, and no plan were enough to escape one simple truth. The moment Venmore's phone was found, the clock started ticking. In the following days, the scope of the case widened. Digital forensics teams pieced together deleted data, recovered financial trails, and even identified locations from background noises in voice notes. One investigator said, "It wasn't just about drugs. It was about control, and they wanted every part of the town under it." When the story broke publicly, the reaction was disbelief. Photos of the two young men in designer tracksuits flooded social media. How could men so young run an operation this large? Parents in Wisbech and Downham Market started to ask, if they could do it, who else is out there doing the same thing now? Overnight, their empire crumbled. Customers disappeared. Couriers vanished. Every encrypted message, once a symbol of their power, was now Exhibit A in court. And every contact, once a trusted associate, was now a potential witness. For Cook, who built his empire on secrecy, there was no system left to hide behind. And for Venmore, the protégé who once followed every order without question, there was nothing left to protect. By the time they appeared in court, the contrast was striking. The same men who flaunted watches and cars now stood behind glass, silent and still, facing charges that included possession with intent to supply Class A drugs, fraud, perverting the course of justice, and possession of weapons. Their story became a warning, not because of the violence or the scale, but because of how ordinary it all seemed. A quiet town. Two ambitious young men. And a system so hidden, it was almost invisible, until it wasn't. Most people only hear about stories like this after it's too late. Don't be one of them. Subscribe right now. Because the next case we cover could expose the same kind of network already operating near you. By the time the case reached Huntingdon law courts in May 2025, the story of Fred Cook and Billy Venmore had spread far beyond Wisbech. Local headlines described it as a modern-day cautionary tale, the rise and ruin of two young men who mistook fear for respect and greed for success. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy. Family members sat in silence, heads low, as the prosecution detailed the months of evidence, thousands of messages, surveillance footage, and financial records tracing drug profits to luxury goods and cash deposits. Fred Cook stood first. Calm, detached, almost analytical, as if still calculating his next move. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts of supplying Class A and B drugs, fraud, and property offenses. Billy Venmore followed soon after, younger, softer in voice, barely audible as he admitted to supplying Class A drugs. The courtroom heard how Cook had masterminded a professional and well-organized operation, hiding behind layers of secrecy and coded communication. How Venmore, though secondary, played an essential role in managing couriers and enforcing discipline. Their empire had been small compared to national syndicates, but within Wisbech and nearby towns, their influence was absolute. When sentencing was handed down, it was decisive. Fred Cook, 5.5 years imprisonment. Billy Venmore, 2 years and 4 months. The judge described Cook's network as methodical, profit-driven, and destructive to the community. And then came the words that echoed across Norfolk. This was not immaturity. It was intent. The following weeks, officers moved swiftly to seize assets, luxury trainers still in boxes, designer watches, cash bundles, and 2 high-end cars believed to have been purchased with drug money. Each item, once a badge of success, was now catalogued, photographed, and stored as evidence of how far greed had gone. In Wisbit, quiet finally returned. But beneath the surface, there was unease. The streets that once carried their deliveries still bore the scars of addiction and dependency. For every arrest made, there were still users trying to recover, still families repairing the damage left behind. In local papers, some called the outcome justice. Others called it a tragedy. Two young men, barely out of adolescence, who could have built anything, but chose to build an empire of illusion. The name Cook once carried weight in whispers. Now, it served only as a warning. In the end, ambition turned to obsession. The image became evidence. And the empire they built to be unseen, ended up seen by everyone. Fred Cook and Billy Venmore built their empire on deception, coded messages, fake identities, and borrowed fear. But the same devices they trusted became the evidence that destroyed them. In Wisbit, their story isn't one of loyalty or brotherhood. It's a warning of how fast control can turn to collapse. They thought their codes made them invisible. But nothing stays hidden forever. If this story shook you, hit subscribe now. And if you somehow made it this far and still haven't, go to the comments and tell us why you'd rather ignore the next story.